The morning my wife collapsed was so ordinary that I never imagined it could carry the weight of a tragedy. Nora moved quietly through the kitchen, humming as she poured juice for our 7-year-old son, Adam. Nothing in her voice and nothing in her eyes hinting that fate was preparing to steal her breath. And then, without warning, without a cry, without a moment to understand, she fell, 1 second standing and the next lying motionless on the floor, as though her soul had slipped through her fingers before anyone could stop it. I carried her to the hospital in a panic I can hardly describe, a panic that felt like drowning while running, and the doctors were quick, too quick, to declare it over, calling it a rare neurological event, a sudden shutdown, a quiet death. I didn't argue because grief makes the mind obedient, soft, unable to question authority. So I sat beside her still body for hours, numb and watching her face that looked painfully alive until the coffin waited and decisions were made and the world moved on without asking if I was ready. We buried her that same morning beneath fresh dark soil and heavy air, as though the sky itself mourned with us. Adam's small, cold fingers wrapped around mine in a silence deeper than any child should know. And I believed the worst was behind us until 1 hour after the burial, when Adam tugged my hand and looked up at me with a face drained of color, whispering, "Dad, Mom talked to me," from inside the coffin, and despite wanting to deny it, the fear in his eyes was the fear of someone who had heard something real. He gripped my sleeve harder and whispered that she was talking slowly, like she couldn't breathe, and had said, "Adam, tell your father I'm still here." And something inside me shattered as instinct crushed logic, and I jumped to my feet, screaming to the workers to dig it up now. They stared as though I'd lost my mind, but a father doesn't choose sanity over a child's fear, and within minutes shovels were biting into earth while my heart hammered and Adam clung to me as if letting go meant letting his mother die again. When the coffin appeared, they lifted it carefully as the funeral director tried to calm me, but I only said, "Open it," my voice filled with terror and hope and madness, and the bolts were unscrewed slowly until the lid lifted and gasps broke the air, not because Nora sat up, but because of what lay on her chest, her phone, the same phone the hospital claimed was misplaced, glowing with a voice message sent to Adam 2 hours after they declared her dead. My hands shook as I pressed play, and after static came a breath, weak and ragged, and then a whisper, "Baby, tell your father I'm still here," and the ground swayed beneath me as I realized this was the sound of a living woman suffocating in darkness. Everything snapped into horrifying clarity. The rushed doctor, the nurse avoiding my eyes, the missing phone, the immediate transfer to the morgue. It wasn't fate, but human failure, negligence sharpened into something close to murder. The police arrived and the detective's face hardened when he heard the recording, saying this might be a crime. But before more could be said, one of the workers gasped that she was breathing. I dropped the phone and fell to my knees, pressing my ear to her chest and hearing a faint, trembling heartbeat, a whisper of life refusing to die. And I screamed for an ambulance while hands moved everywhere trying to save her, and I held her icy hand, whispering for her to stay with me until her fingers twitched once, but enough to break the world open. Paramedics rushed her away, and as they lifted her onto the stretcher, she opened her eyes for a second, wide and terrified, whispering, "Adam, I called," before slipping under again. She spent weeks in intensive care, fighting for breath and consciousness and life itself, while I stayed beside her every day and Adam slept only in the chair beside her bed, afraid to miss her voice again. Investigations exploded. The doctor who signed the certificate was suspended. 2 nurses placed under criminal review for falsifying documents. The hospital board facing charges. But none of that mattered more than the morning she finally opened her eyes fully, light spilling into them as though she had returned from another world. Tears rising as she whispered, "I kept calling. I knew you'd hear me." And I held her as gently as breath and whispered, "You're home. You came back." Weeks later, when Nora walked out of the hospital between Adam and me, fragile but alive, the sunlight felt sacred as she held our hands like anchors to life. And I understood that survival is not always given freely. Sometimes it is wrestled back from the grave by the tiny voice of a child and a father who chooses to believe the impossible.